Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, Attorney Kim Hegwood of Your Legacy Legal Care, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
And good morning and welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest today is Ingrid Monroy. Good morning.
Good morning, Kim.
So I am super excited to have Ingrid on because I've been a huge fan of Mikey's Place for years. And so we've given out guides, things like that. So when I was thinking about guests, I was like, oh, Catherine, we got to get her back on. So today we're going to talk about your story. I know it because you've told me, but we're going to let our listeners hear it as well because we're going to talk about why you built Mikey's Guide, and why you have basically it's a lifeline for disability resources in Texas. So it's huge, it's phenomenal, it's updated all the time, it's really great. So tell our listeners, that you created Mikey's Guide because you needed basically you were looking for what to do when your son graduated high school, right? And so um, tell their listeners, what happened when you started trying to figure out what do I do with a child that has a disability when they're an adult?
Yes, and Kim, it actually started long before Mikey became an adult. When he was in a PPCD program, he had done so well, during the school year. And then summer was rapidly approaching, and we thought, oh gosh, what are we going to do during the summertime? Because he still needed that structure and had been thriving. So I just started kind of talking to other parents and just combing websites and, local nonprofits and other organizations, excuse me, that provided opportunities in the summer. And so I just kind of made a list for myself about summer camps, and I just kept researching and going. And so the Mikey's Guide actually started as probably a 20-page pamphlet about summer camps, for kids with disabilities, generally in Houston, but a lot of the overnight camps, of course, are scattered around Texas. So that kind of, spread our reach a little bit. So that's really how we got started. And then, as Mikey grew and, we thought things are changing as he's growing. We're going to need different types of services. And so we just kept adding different sections and chapters. And of course, we had lots of great input from other families who had walked this path ahead of us. And we just wanted to keep adding to the guide, and we'd get suggestions from parents. When Mikey was still young, people were asking me, what do we do after high school? And I thought, oh gosh, we're not there yet, but I need to start looking into this because it's going to be here. The future's coming. So that's basically how we got started, and just like I said, kept adding other chapters because as I mentioned, it started with summer camps, but then I thought, well, gosh, there's all these other great organizations out there supporting families. We need to include them and make a list of contact information for all these services and other nonprofits. And when I started it, of course, I was looking for the book with all this information in it because as I learned through my research, there's a ton of great info out there in other organizations, but it's scattered. Each organization, of course, has their own website, but you're having to scour all these websites, to get that information. So I kind of have a marketing research background, and I thought I enjoyed it. So I started compiling and putting it all together, and would go to various resource fairs and, with my little prototype of Mikey's Guide, and meet with other families. And the reception was really overwhelming, and people said, oh, this is so great. I really need this. So that, proved to me I was onto something, and I knew if we needed it, there were certainly other families who could use the guide.
Well, you have to think, since you started, Mikey's Guide has grown into a massive resource covering everything from summer camps to Medicaid waivers. When you first started, did you imagine that who did you imagine this guide would serve, and how has that audience expanded over the years?
Well, I guess I can remember actually sitting down with Mikey's physical therapist at one point, and I said, I have this idea for this book, and I think I would just love to have everything, disability in the book, medical, schools, educational, all this stuff, but it was overwhelming. So that's why I started slow and just did, started with summer camps at the beginning. And of course, we were a young family when I started, and I didn't know the road that lie ahead of us. And so we kind of started, researching services for the younger kids. And then we kept meeting other families and getting suggestions about, well, is this book appropriate for my family because I have a teenager? And so that's, again, how we kind of expanded the book. And we, targeted, of course, Houston. The book is marketed to Houston families, and really it has now grown to serve all disabilities and all age groups. And, hopefully something for everyone. Everyone now will be able to find some service or organization or support or resource that they're seeking, because as your child with a disability ages, your needs are changing, and you're needing to learn about different types of services. For example, once you get out of school, you need to start planning adult life, and actually, obviously, you need to plan before you get there. You need to start in middle school or even sooner. So that's why I kind of reorganized the book a couple of editions ago and put all this good information about, services you provide, for example, talking about SSI and guardianship and all that. I moved that to the front of the book, to the, kind of the intro chapters of, you've just got a diagnosis. Now what do I do? So we lay out, not in great detail because it is highly complicated. We leave that to experts such as yourself. But, showing sort of the timeline of what topics you need to be thinking about as your child ages. SSI is one, Medicaid waivers obviously is a huge one. And so then we also repeat that section in the teen and adult chapter later on in the book, just to make sure people are really understanding the importance of that.
Definitely. So the guide includes things like specialized summer camps, year-round classes, adaptive sports, ministries, respite programs, and so much more. What categories do family tell you are the most life-changing or the hardest to find without a guide like this?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think, really the number one comment we get is just, we're so grateful to have all this information in one place. So we're not having to run around with our heads cut off from here, there, and yon, and researching all the different websites and organizations. I think a lot of people, for example, that purchase the book at our annual camp and resource fair, they have their young families coming through. Perhaps their child has just received a diagnosis, and they had no idea that their child could go to camp, or that there was a private school that would, accept their child. And so we've done that event 15 years now, and every time somebody is in tears saying, this is amazing information, we just had no idea all this was available to our child. And so it is overwhelming. It gives parents hope, but they're able to take away the guide that has all that info. They can hang on to that and refer back to it 5-10 years down the road and say, okay, now I need to really study this chapter. Because if you hand a book to parents and say, you need to learn all this, it's truly overwhelming. So we like to introduce those big topics in a kind of gentle manner without completely overwhelming folks, and say, these are, topics you're going to be hearing over the years. You need to get yourself familiar with them. And, for example, the Medicaid waivers, that's such a hot topic. And we're so grateful to the new Caitlin Handley Act that is requiring now school districts at first meeting with parents to inform them of the Medicaid waivers and to get their child on the list. So a lot of people are asking me, what's the waiver? Why is it important? So, there's info about that and how to get on the waiver list in Mikey's guide. And I tell parents, don't worry about what it is. If your child is 2 years old, 3 years old, you're just getting on the list. Sadly, it's going to be a decade and a half, probably wait before services. You have plenty of time to read about each of the waivers and learn more about, the services they provide, but just get on the list now and then just worry about, which waiver may be the most appropriate for your child at the time. Their name comes to the top of the list.
Yeah, I've been telling clients for years, you get on it early, because some of my clients have been waiting 15, years to get on,
Yes.
actually, finally hit. And so,
Yes.
with me, I did my first ARD meeting with a friend of mine back when I first became an attorney, right? She had a son that had a disability. So she goes, come with me. I'm all over the place, and then I had to do ARD meetings with my own daughter, which was interesting when she became disabled. And so, but many parents struggle to navigate things like ARDs and IEPs and ECIs and PPCDs and other educational systems. So how does Mikey's Guide help families understand and access these educational resources?
Yes, that's another challenge. If your child, like in our family, we went through sort of the traditional route. Mikey, we knew immediately after he was born that there was going to be an issue. So we got ECI support at 6 months old, went through the whole ECI route thanks to our doctor, pediatrician, and was actually a hematologist at the time, said, he's getting ECI support, right? And I said, no, what's that? And so they told us all about that. And these amazing women therapists came to our home, several times a week and started therapy on Mikey when he was 6 months old. So yes, there's a lot of scary acronyms, once your child too, if they haven't gone through ECI, it's even a little more scary and challenging because you're going straight from maybe just, a Mother's Day Out program or some kind of Head Start or, before they go into a school setting in preschool. And then you're slammed at an ARD meeting with, IEP and ARD meetings and, supportive services and all this stuff. That's like, what is this? So again, in Mikey's Guide, we've kind of laid out what to expect. If your child has just been diagnosed, here are the possible routes that, your child might take to get the services. ECI obviously is one, and that's the big one and very helpful. Once you graduate at age 3 from ECI, then you're referred to the school system, and that's where our meetings begin. And parents just need to know how to advocate for themselves and learn about all the services. And it's the schools will give you some information, but yeah, at that point I say that probably is the most challenging time because parents are grappling potentially with a brand new diagnosis for a child. Now they're being tossed into the school system and having to learn all these new words and acronyms. So we've laid all that out in Mikey's Guide, just explaining, these are the words and terms you might be hearing. And just give some, tips about how to communicate with your school once you've started school. And because there's a lot to learn at that step, and you're always learning, and sadly you're always advocating. I mean, it's a full-time job, but it's clearly totally worth it. We all want the best outcomes for our kids. So learning what you can upon entering school or prior to is very, very important. And there's a lot of, other support groups and family organizations that can help, guide families through that process as well. We just give kind of an overview, of what to expect when a child starts school.
So in addition to that, they have to worry about Medicaid waivers, SSI, able accounts, future planning, and all that can be very overwhelming. So what do you wish every family understood about these systems, and how does the guide simplify the process?
Oh gosh, yes. I guess families really need to plan ahead. I guess that was the best advice we got, and I heard it was just hammered in my brain for years. And I thought, okay, and it's just bits at a time. Like I said, you just need to kind of start learning the terms and the services that are out there. You don't need to just dive in and master it all in one setting, which is impossible. Start looking at the waivers, for example. There's, I believe it's 7 Medicaid waivers in Texas, which is complicated. Probably more than it really needs to be. That's a whole nother podcast. But so learning about what each of the waivers do, the names of them, what types of disabilities they serve, what ages do they serve, because there's some that are basically for life. There's some that stop at age 18. There are some, that is specific to like deaf, blind, multiple disability. And so you can get on every list that you want, and then when your child's name comes to the top of the list, then you've had time, like I said, probably at least a decade, to really dive in and learn about all these waivers. And then of course SSI is another big one that approaches, happens at age 18. So you need to start preparing at least 6 months prior to your child's 18th birthday. So they, can tap into Social Security benefits. It's supplemental security income that provides, monthly payment, a check for your child that can be extremely helpful to families. And excuse me, guardianship is another big one. And now there's, different types of guardianship. I remember talking with friends over the years. They're like, I don't want to, have my child just completely give up his rights because he's able to communicate well and can express his needs. And so now there's sort of this hybrid, supported decision making where the child can participate, in their future medical decisions and their life decisions. In our case, that was not a possibility. So we had to, pursue full guardianship for Mikey. But it's supremely important because if we did not have that, and after he turns 18, these doctors, lawyers, any, medical people, anybody, they say, well, he's an adult. He can tell us what he wants or needs. And, without a guardianship, we would have no input in that. And they would essentially be making decisions for Mikey, which we do not want to happen.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And so, definitely. So, you started in 2007, it's expanded, and grown, over the years to a phenomenal guide because I send a lot of parents to you. And so, but I want to give you a chance to talk about the Together program, your new program.
Yes. Thank you. So in September of 2022, we started a new vocational program for young adults 20 and up who, again, was motivated by Mikey. He graduated, he was a pandemic graduate, so essentially lost out on half of his senior year of high school, which was a huge bummer because Mikey always really enjoyed going to school and being around friends and all the social activities and football games and pep rallies and, just the whole fun environment of high school. So that actually, we always heard about the services cliff, once we graduated high school, that everything is going away and you've got to start planning again for, employment or, day program or volunteering or what is life going to look like after school when everything drops off. There's no more social. You're not going to a campus every day where there's lots of people and in a classroom where there's just a built-in support. You're losing the speech therapy, the PT, the OT, any therapies, that the school may have provided all those years. So I started, before he graduated, when he was in high school, I was looking around for programs and, found some, but not exactly what I thought was appropriate for Mikey or would be a best fit. And then I had heard about a program in College Station, actually, that was started by a teacher that used to teach in the 18 plus program in our school district. We're in Spring Branch ISD. And so I went to visit what she started in College Station and was blown away. And I thought, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to create this program and we're going to base it on this model, because their model had been running about maybe 4 or 5 years at the time I met her, and was highly successful. And so we held parent interest meetings and, identified some families besides our own that would be very interested in this, because the other families like ours had tried, Texas workforce route and other employment, supported employment type opportunities. And in our case and others, door was slammed, in our face, and sorry, I just don't know what we can do for your son, and which was highly frustrating and aggravating, because that's the mandate of Texas workforce, is to find employment for our guys. And this personal story, but I don't think Mikey would mind sharing. He's all about sharing, but he needs assistance in the bathroom and still assistance with feeding. And that, forget it. I mean, that closed the door to just about every post-high school opportunity. And so that is what we're doing. Again, we're basing it on this other program in College Station, and we've tweaked it slightly. And we have, kids like Mikey that may need extra supports, but we create products. They are making beautiful candles, goat milk soaps. They make bowls out of clay. They're decoupaging a lot. They make Christmas ornaments, art, unique art pieces. It's a whole variety of different products. And, our goal as a business model for the program is, create these products that are desirable and pretty, number one. And then when we go out and sell them at markets, people learn the whole backstory, about who made them. And, they're all in. They're sold because everything is just so beautiful. And they learn the whole purpose, behind the mission of Together at Mikey's Place is to provide these dear adults who are lacking in opportunities, daily purpose, a loving, supported environment, and social opportunities, and they are just thriving. I'm just so happy to say they're thriving. It's just been an amazing program. Probably the most honestly rewarding thing I've done with Mikey's Place. Because again, our kids are only kids for a short time period, and the whole adult life lies ahead of them. So we've really, really focused and put a lot of resources and attention on Together at Mikey's Place the past almost 4 years now. So we started small with 5 artisans. We're now up to 15. We started in donated space at a church. We're now in our own office warehouse space that's 3,300 square feet, and we have a shop where people can come in and purchase products. And everybody is just, they're learning job skills. They're learning customer service. They're learning, just life skills. And, every moment is a teachable opportunity. They're weighing things, they're measuring things, they're sorting, they're doing inventory. It's, the learning opportunities are just really endless. And we sell our products on our website. We sell out in the community at markets. So they're out, meeting with customers and checking them out and scanning barcodes and talking about what they make. And they just take such pride in their craft. And it's been so great, so great.
Well, I have 2 of those trays that I bought the last time I was at the fair, and my jewelry sits on them. They're beautiful. So, Ingrid, tell people where they can find you.
Yes, so anyone can call us at 713-591-1965, or we have 2 websites. So the General Mikey's Place website is www.mikeysplace.net. And then we do have a separate website for the Together program because there's just loads and loads of extra info on there that we just didn't want to put on the Mikey's Place website. So Together is www.together-mp.net.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ingrid, and we look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.